My name is Saray Khumalo, the first Black African woman to summit Mount Everest and ski to the South Pole. I am a transformational coach, and today I'm talking to Dove about leadership lessons from the mountain, about the fact that we are all uniquely extraordinary, and being ordinary is a choice. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dove Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dove Barron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dove Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dove Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Every mountain climber knows that as you climb higher and higher, your journey it's going to become more and more important for you to become discerning about who is on your team. But how will you know that you have the right team members before you try to ascend the next mountain of success? Is your team the right team, or do you need a different team to reach that next summit? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dove Barron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. You can find out more about me at dovebaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. And this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and sometimes a little intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about neuroscientists, astronauts, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, entrepreneurs, skeptics, Grammy award-winning entertainers, and even some folks you might think you completely disagree with until you listen and you discover how truly fascinating these conversations are. Simply go to dovebaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into a delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us a #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also listen to us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying play Dove Barron podcast. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. You've heard me say many times that if you're going to climb Success Mountain, just to say that you did it, well, it won't be long before that feeling will be pretty flat. We've also spoken many times about the need for doing things because of a greater purpose, because not only will there be some amazing wins, there's going to be probably some mega losses along the way. If there's not something driving you, giving you the resilience to overcome the obstacles, well, at first difficulty, it's just permission to quit. However, when you do decide to keep going, have you considered that maybe the sky is not the limit? Because in life, you are going to hit many psychological and emotional walls, and you're going to get knocked on your ass. That's just how it is. The question is, do you have the internal and external, emotional, mental, and even spiritual and physical Sherpas to get you up to win? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going. Our guest on this episode is Saray Khumalo. Her life is a story of remarkable resilience. She's overcome the odds most of us will never even likely face. She has met catastrophic failure and even death head on. And she's kept going, not because of sheer willpower, but because of being purpose-driven. Saray is the first Black African woman to summit Everest and reach the South Pole. She is an award-winning mountaineer and a philanthropist who has used her climbs to build libraries across South Africa. She has recently partnered with Apple to build digital libraries. She is also part of the Forbes Women Africa Leading Women Summit 2021. Saray Khumalo is a transformational and business executive coach, of whom the South African president said she reminds us that through courage and perseverance, we can achieve our highest ambitions for the greater good of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Saray Khumalo! Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We're happy to have you. We're excited to have you here. Now, I always like to start the show by asking my guests, in this age of influencers where everybody's an expert, who is somebody that we might not know, maybe and never even considered, who's been a major influence on you and on your leadership?
Oh, wow. I have two people, actually. It's my mother and my grandmother. My mother didn't do too much school. She went up to Form 2, which is the second level of high school. But she could sell ice to an Eskimo, and and she always believed that the sky is the limit, which is something that she used to tell my sisters and I. She ended up being a single mother with 7 girls, and she had to really
7 girls.
Absolutely. So you can imagine what was going on in the house, especially living in a patriarchal environment. So that was a lot of fun. But also my grandmother just, and my grandfather were amazing people. They were missionaries who really, my grandfather always used to say, if you do not live a life of service, that is a life wasted. And as a young kid, you don't really put too much thought to it. But they've been just amazing people to me because even though they did not have much, there was always something to help somebody else. Always blessed.
Wow. So are your grandparents still around?
No, unfortunately, my grandmother was the last to pass away. She passed away at 101, which is quite crazy. Yeah.
Wow. And so if you put together like your grandparents and that where they were coming from and your mom, what is that, if you were sort of able to boil it down, what would be the central philosophy that you've gained from those two sources, grandparents and mother?
A lot of it came to the fore for me in 2009, and the biggest and fundamental philosophy is the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. It's realizing that I can achieve more with the right partnerships around me. And I think that is fundamental to everything. It supported me with my executive job. It supported me on the mountain. But also to realize when certain partnerships are not the partnerships that you need for specific levels of where you are at. Mm-hmm. Because, about climbing. There are Sherpas that you use up to Everest base camp. They're not necessarily the same ones that you need for the summit. How do you appreciate them and really say goodbye in order for you to get to the summit?
Yeah, I've talked about this. I talked about this with Kathy, as you know, because I just found it such a beautiful metaphor for success versus fulfillment. Because success is you climbed. I actually know lots of people who've done Everest, but it's been to check a box. It's been to say I did that. Whereas what you're doing is vastly different. And this understanding of, not only that there are Sherpas for base camp versus the summit or any other part, but understanding the value and appreciation of those people for what it is they do, rather than focusing on what it is they don't do. So I really appreciate that, and I'm very grateful that you even brought that up. What would you say it is that drives you? Because I talked about before that if we're doing things for success, it's likely to fall pretty flat. And if we don't have a sort of a purpose and a driver, what would you say drives you more than anything?
I think it's the realization and appreciation that I don't have forever. I have today and I have now. And I want to leave my world just a little bit better than I found it. And I think that is one thing, that that sense of agency and realization that even though I cannot change the whole world, I can create an impact and inspire somebody else to do more. And as a collective, we can change the narrative for the next generation. And that excites me, and it also drives me at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Is that urgency? You know, that's a term that's thrown around a lot.
Yes.
But is it? I know it sounds ridiculous, but has it become more urgent? Do you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
know, we use that term. You know, there's an urgency to this. There's an urgency to climate, for instance, but it's clearly not urgent enough for some people. So when you talk about this urgency, has it changed? Is it, you know, give us your sense of it.
So absolutely, I think it's something that I did mention that I lost my older sister in 2009, which is where I started questioning a lot of things. You know,
Mm,
who will remember the arguments that I would have won in the boardroom? Is this it? Is this what I'm all about? You know,
right.
until I got into, I actually say I'm an accidental mountaineer. You know, I went on to Kili as a bucket list item, but the agency was really elevated in 2014 when I found myself on the 18th of April at Everest Base Camp, and a Sirac fell and killed 16 Sherpas. That was, it wiped away all the romantic notions of Everest. I had read about people dying on the mountain, bodies, and all these things that people talk about, but to actually see bodies being picked up from the Kumbu icefall and being brought by helicopter onto the platform at Everest Base Camp was the most scary. I remember running, I was the novice climber, the least experienced in the team. I remember running to the guys that were a lot more experienced and saying, what do we do? They were just as scared as I was, you know,
Really.
and the guys that lost their lives were a lot more experienced than I was. But the one thing that was humbling and I kind of was forced to accept and realize is the fact that it was their time, but it's not mine. It could
Mm,
have been, but it's not. So what am I going to do before my time comes? You know, and that just creates the awareness that tomorrow is not a guarantee. And I've tried to live my life in the same way. I know when to pull back. So that is not a license to be careless with my life.
mm-hmm.
Um, and also be able to fight or climb another day. But at the same time, I try and be deliberate in everything that I'm doing, knowing the objective that is at hand.
Yeah, it's you know, the concept. I mean, like you said, you'd heard about the bodies on Everest, and most people actually don't know that. But if you meet anybody who's ever been on Everest, they'll tell you, "Oh yeah, there's bodies all over the place," so, as well as garbage, which is pretty sad. But um, it's I always say that things are conceptual until they're real for this for in a subjective reality. So you know, you have a first-hand experience of it. When you have a first-hand experience of being on Everest and 16 people have died while you're on that mountain, it's pretty hard for us to imagine, is that like everybody stops, everything stops? What walk us through a little bit about the experience of that.
Chaos,
Yeah,
confusion, you
yeah.
know, and you know, Everest Base Camp is a hub of these people from all over the world that just believe that nothing is impossible. You
Hmm.
know, optimistic. You know, everybody is just they're here to step on top of the world. So that changes to really people that are so scared, and you realize that they're human after all, you know. And also the realization that so much talent, so much experience and the life has just been lost. And you start questioning, should I have been here? You know, am I doing the right thing? You know, and I think it changes from one thing to the next. I don't know if you've been following what was happening on K2. K2 had never been summited in winter, and 10 Sherpas summited in winter, and we lost about 5 brilliant climbers, some of the brilliant climbers around the world. It it also makes you realize that we have no control as much as we think we do. You know,
Mhm.
before any incident, everybody thinks, I've got this. I'll use the carabiner,
Yeah.
I've got the ropes, I've got the experience, until you realize that we're just a speck in the bigger scheme of things, you know, and we need to approach everything with respect that is required.
You know, it's very interesting for me, Sarah, in that when I, you know, from a psychology point of view, I understand that we are all subjectively driven. We all have our own reasons for doing things, but there's often a overarching reason for doing things. And you've been a climber for a long time now. You know and have known many climbers. You've interviewed many of them yourself. Um, do you feel like there's a common thread of why they climb?
Um, there's different reasons.
Sure.
I've met climbers that climb because they just love climbing. They grew up climbing. You know, I've met climbers that climb for a purpose. Alan Nanette being one of them is climbing for Alzheimer's. I climb because I love climbing, but I found a way to change the narrative for the next generation through education. So I use it to raise money. I've become a voice that I would otherwise not have become because of some of this stuff that I've been able to do. A
Hmm.
child is actually going to get an education because I dared to do something. You know, I could climb and just get a selfie and come back down, and it's a nice conversation around a bride, you know, or around the dinner table.
Hmm.
But for me, it's just not enough. It's
No.
not worth it. And having said that, I'm not going to ignore the fact that there's quite a few egos on the mountain. You know, people that are there for their own reasons that may be right in their own world and may not be right. But
Sure.
yeah.
So you talked about attempting to summit, and then the avalanche and the death of the 16 people. Then that was in 2014, I think you said. Then in
Correct.
2015, you had another go at it. What happened
Yes.
that time?
So 2015, I went back. The one thing that I did is to really take out all the positives that I got from 2014. What I picked up is runners and cyclists were doing a much better job at climbing than I was, you know.
Oh.
So I changed my training program. I adopted a lot of things that I saw were valuable. I went back 2015. I was between Camp 1 and Camp 4 during a rotation, Camp 1 and Camp 2, I beg your pardon, during a rotation. And the plan was we were climbing all the way to Camp 2, and if we were there by 2 o'clock, we would have lunch and come back to Camp 1. But if we were not there, we would go back at 2 o'clock, cut off, go back to Camp 1, which is where our sleeping bags and everything were. And 9 climbers we were. 3 were quite fast, they went on. 5 of us were behind. And my Sherpa said, if I walked as slow as everybody else, I wasn't going to make it. So let's go. So him and I start walking. And
Mhm.
as very close to Camp 2, we could see it.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the glacier beneath us started really shaking vigorously. We were confused. We didn't know what it was. So he
Whoa.
turns around and he puts his carabiner onto my harness and he says to me, watch, we are jumping. So this was like, okay, Nawang had 22 years experience at that time. So I'm watching his feet and I'm like, he jumps to the left, I go to the left. I wasn't going to argue with the man. And it felt like 5 minutes, but I believe it was just under 2 minutes. The earthquake, what we now know as the earthquake, stopped. And he starts taking the carabiner off. He says, we're all right. We're both trying to figure out what just happened. I mean, an earthquake, we wouldn't have thought it was an earthquake. And suddenly, where Camp 1, between Camp 1 and 2, the two mountains, Numtse, Lhotse, and Everest, all these mountains, that earthquake shook them so much that they started avalanching towards us. And I mean, this was the year after the 16 Sherpas died, and he started praying, Omani Pemeum, it's a Tibetan prayer. And I remember looking at him, it's so scared he was, and thinking, this God of yours, he ain't saving me, right? Because that's a prayer that I was reciting because, they taught it to us, but there's no way that God was coming to save him and I. And for me, that's really something that on reflection is very applicable even to now. The pandemic has hit. How decisive are we in our decisions in leading the team? Because when he said something as crazy as let's jump a crevasse, which probably would have killed both of us, I believed him. I was aligned with him. I was watching, and we were doing the same thing. But when he was
jumped
scared,
to the left, and a crevice just opened.
Exactly.
If you'd have stayed where you were, you'd have got sucked down into the crevasse, disappeared.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or I suck him, or he goes down and takes me down with him, or vice versa, And it's just really, I think, I chatted to my team when I came back, and I said, it's just important to make a call. If it's the wrong call, get up quickly and go. But let's make a call and let's all move in one direction. Because if it's his prayer was saying, let's go to Everest, I was probably saying, Jesus, take me to Lhotse. And we were not aligned, know.
But
so,
it's a great lesson in building the trust with those that you lead. Because here's your Sherpa saying, jump left. And you don't go, well, I have not considered that. And have you thought about this? It's like, do you trust this your leader in that moment or not? And when you do, you jump. And that's all there is to it. And it's not about being a good follower, although that's important. It's about that leader building a level of trust with you that is so rock solid that you will jump across a crevasse and save your life without having to think about it. That level of trust is phenomenal.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
That's a powerful lesson.
Yeah. So that was 2015. And obviously Nepal lost about 9,000 people. Base camp lost about 22 people because, the mountains around avalanched rocks. It was just quite a terrible experience. We were stuck at Camp 2 for 2 days because when we tried to go back to Camp 1, the crevasses had opened up, the ladders had fallen in. We couldn't get to Camp 1. And the mountain was closed. I remember I stayed in Nepal for about a week to help because there was quite a lot of devastation. And I came home 2016. I couldn't make it. I was funding myself, so I didn't have enough money in 2016. 2017, I went back and I had a real chance of really summiting. I went all the way up to the South Summit, which is really 99 meters from the top. But we miscalculated the weather window, still with the same Sherpa. And I remember thinking at the South Summit, we stopped, he was changing my oxygen and checking. And I see he goes in front and he's struggling as much as I was. So I said, Nawang, but if we miss putting this safety carabiner in, we could be blown off to Tibet or Nepal. So I said to him, no, I've got extra oxygen, which is something that I always did. I would buy extra oxygen so that if something goes wrong, we've got additional oxygen. So maybe let's go back to Camp 1, wait until the winds subside, and we can attempt again. So he said, let's do that. We start going, but what I didn't realize, there was something wrong with my oxygen supply. So for probably more than 5 hours, I was going and inhaling and exhaling the same air. And I started saying to him, there's something wrong because I should be feeling stronger as we're coming down, but I'm not. And he says, no, but we can see Camp 4. Let's go. And I don't know what just happened. I lost consciousness. And this is the death zone that's between Camp 4 and the summit.
Why do
And
they call it the death zone?
yes, the death
Why do they
zone.
call it that?
Oh, yeah. So this is where, when you look at the fine print that you sign, they're really saying if anything happens to you in that region, no one is obliged to risk their lives to assist you.
Right.
And it's the zone where the levels of oxygen, I believe, are below 40% what you find at sea level.
Wow.
So yeah, you start using supplemental oxygen at Camp 3 generally. And as you know, there's very few people in the world that have summited 8,000ers without oxygen, but it is possible. But yeah.
So you got to, so this is now your third attempt. You are your air's not working, your oxygen's not working properly. You're in the death zone, and it's just you and your Sherpa, just the
Yeah.
two of you.
Yeah, it was just the two of us because what happened actually when we were going up, we were a team of 3 climbers and 3 Sherpas. When we got to the South Summit, it's the first time I realized that the rest of the people were not behind me. I remember initially thinking, oh, girl, you're doing well. But obviously, they must have picked up that the winds are too crazy and they went back. But anyway, so when I lost consciousness, he couldn't help me because he wasn't doing well himself. And he went to camp and he got other Sherpas and they came to help me. This is mostly hearsay because I was unconscious. When we got to Camp 4, we found that those winds were so bad that they had blown off our tent. So my sleeping bag was gone, like everything that I had left in the tent was gone. So he just got a makeshift tent. Some people leave tents there, and he put me there, changed my oxygen tank, and left me there for the night. The next day.
So you're there. Hold on a second. I want to make sure people can grasp this because you've been climbing. It's just the two of you. The weather's turned. You've not got the oxygen, and he's not doing so well. You get to your tent. It's gone. Your sleeping bag, everything is gone. You are now blacking out, and he's wrapping you or doing whatever it is in a makeshift tent and trying to go for help, but he's not been doing well either. So it
No.
looks like pretty much the end is pretty close, I'd
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah, it was. I mean, they thought, they didn't think I would make it because the next day when the 6 Sherpas came, they came with a stretcher that they use to pick up anybody that's injured or unconscious. And I felt somebody touch me, but it was another Sherpa who I know. So I said, Lakpa, and then he just says, oh, you're alive. And I'm thinking, I'm alive, but I'm hungry, because I had been left there without any food. And he says, no, but I have no food. But he had a flask of water, hot water, which he gave me. I think for the first time, Dov, I remember looking up at Everest because it's so close and yet so far, and wondering whether all those people that said I couldn't make it, I was Black, I was female, like all sorts of crazy things that people said. I wondered whether all those naysayers were right. And I was just being stubborn. And I always say it was the lowest point in my journey. I said to them I didn't want to go onto the stretcher. I walked all the way, I climbed down all the way up to Camp 2, and I was airlifted from there. And it's just, I came home having given up inside, even though I had not verbalized it. 2018, I kept training, but I wasn't really talking about climbing. And one day, sitting in the lounge, my son comes and says, Mom, when are you going back to Everest?
Not
It's
if,
not, are you
but
going
when.
back? But when are you going back? So I remember just looking at him and thinking, okay, what am I going to say? And I just thought, I said to him, 2020, because the reality is, I always said to him when he loses a soccer match or we had a bad game, figure out why, go back, drop what didn't work and use what worked and change the strategy. So for him, there is no way I could have given up. I must be cooking up a plan. I probably looked bored, I must admit. And I made a decision that I was going to go back in 2020. But in 2019, I lost a friend, actually the first person to tell me no Black African female had summited Everest, because until 2013, I didn't know.
No.
I just thought there is no way, and he said yes. And him and I went to France to train, and he always believed I would be. And 3 weeks before I left in 2019, he lost his life. And I remember thinking about those 16 Sherpas, about the fact that I don't know what will happen tomorrow. And I picked up my bags and I called Noah Hanna, who's the gentleman that actually led the team that I went with in 2019, and joined him. I did a lot of things differently. I mean, starting with who I went with. I didn't just go with a Sherpa because they're a Sherpa, but I went with somebody that was trained as a guide. He had summited Everest 8 times. Our summit was the 9th. I was part of the discussions. Why is it a good weather window? What is our strategy? And I went into a small team with 3 climbers and 1 lead. And I also, what was different this time was the fact that I wasn't anxious about the summit. I just got to Camp 1 and celebrated, and that was success. Got to Camp 2 and celebrated, and we had made a plan that we'll move from Camp 4 to the summit within 12 hours. 10 minutes before the summit, if we are close to the summit, 10 minutes before 12 hours, he would allow us to summit. Otherwise, we all go down. It didn't matter how much money we had spent on this. And that just did it. I mean, in 11 hours, I think about 15 minutes, we were on the summit. And that was just, what a humbling moment, yeah.
What a great metaphor, though, for real success in business. You're going to get knocked on your ass. You're not likely to lose your life, or you're not likely to have your life threatened, but it can feel that way at a psychological identity level, that, who you believed you were is destroyed. And again, the lesson, as I talked about at the beginning, of making sure that you have the right team around you and that you appreciate the team you had that got you to the level you needed to get to, but maybe you need a different strategy and a different team to go to the next level. And then at the same time, this level of urgency around, you never know when your time is up. And you saw that firsthand with the death of the Sherpas, and even your own potential death, being left unconscious and, believed that you would be dead. And all those things, I mean, that's some great lessons. But, we haven't even talked about that in the middle of all this. We'll go back a couple of years to 2016 when you're training. Tell us about what happened in 2016, because again, here's another example of getting knocked on your ass and somehow you come back. So I want to know not only what happened, but why did you come back? Like most people are like, you know what? See ya. Besides the fact that you're clearly a stubborn woman.
That I wouldn't argue with that.
No, I'm sure your family would agree, right?
So 2016, I did mention that before 2014, all I did was gym work to get to, as part of my training. And I realized that climbers that were cyclists and runners that did a lot more cardio were having a better time in the mountain. So I started running and cycling. So 2016, I couldn't afford to go back after 2014 and 15. I was part of a group who were actually doing what is called a stage race. So mountain biking. The first day we did about 60 kilometers. The next day, on the 34th kilometer, I remember I was coming down from a mountain And what I didn't realize getting closer to the bottom was that I had lost my back brakes.
Oh,
And when I tried to balance the bike, it just threw me off.
sure.
It was terrible. I hit my head on the ground. I broke my arm. I cracked my head quite badly. The helmet, if you see it, you just think there's no way this person survived. And I ended up in a coma. I mean, I was airlifted from that point. I think I was probably going at about 42 kilometers an hour
Wow.
at the time. I remember the doctors even wondering, was this a mountain bike or a motorbike? you know.
Mhm.
Um, I ended up in a coma for about 3 weeks. I got out of there. This happened on the 8th of August, 2016. And at the end of August, I was released from the hospital. They just said to me, don't get back on the bike because if you hit your head again, they may not be able to put Humpty Dumpty together again. Um, and I came home. I started walking. I just didn't want to risk running, and I walked all through September.
Mhm.
October, I started running. I had a Soweto marathon entry. It's like Boston Marathon. We have our
Mhm.
own, which is a Soweto marathon. I tried to give it away, the entry, and nobody wanted it. I suppose they just like, this woman is bad news, And I made a decision that since in October I started running. In November, when the Soweto Marathon was happening, I went to the starting line, and I said I'll just do half a marathon. And if you know anything about South Africa, we celebrate everything. And the guys that were doing 42 kilometers were singing and were dancing. It was just a positive vibe. And I'm like, hell, I'm doing a 42. And I crossed the line and I went because I had a 42-kilometer,
Wow.
race card. And I went in and I ran the 42, finished it, got the medal. It was a Sunday. And on the Monday, I was back at my doctor's. I'm like, if I could run 42 kilometers, surely I can still climb. And I think the poor man probably didn't want to argue, and he just knew that he's not going to win this
Not gonna
battle.
win.
He's like, 3 weeks before you leave, come and see me, and let's see what happens. And then I found myself back on Everest, 2017, which was the unsuccessful attempt when I lost consciousness. Yeah.
But that was a serious injury. You were in a coma.
Yeah.
Were they, meaning your family, were your people afraid for your life? I mean, somebody's in a coma, it's not usually a good scene.
No, no, no. They were definitely afraid for my life. I've got family all over the world. They came to say goodbye. In
Right.
fact, my kids were asked not to come and see me so that they remember me the way I was. But the irony in that is I attempted Everest. I mean, I've climbed Aconcagua, Elbrus, but a mountain bike, in my backyard almost killed me.
Yeah.
That is not a sign to say whether I lock myself in my room, I'm going to die anyway.
Yep.
The point is, let it not come when you haven't actually lived, you know.
No.
And I just think they always say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's a bit of truth in that, you
Sure.
know. If I could still climb, why not?
Right.
I don't stop living because that has happened to me. I just figure out what am I meant to learn from it, and how can I do things differently. It's like we still drive, and yet people have died on the highway. We
But
drive cautiously, but we still drive, right?
yeah, but you have this sense of resilience. You have a resilience that I think is quite, or generally speaking, is quite rare. And it seems like that resilience, you know, it's my belief that from a psychological position, we are formed early. What I mean by that is there's some things that are intrinsically built into us very early on. And this drive within you to overcome obstacles, this resilience, that comes from a long time before climbing. Just walk us back a little bit and help our listeners to understand where you came from in order to get to this place that, where you just do not go down.
Yeah. Oh, well, where do I start? I was born in Lusaka, Zambia. It's one of the countries in Central Africa, landlocked, to a single mother that was really supported by my grandparents. Actually did my primary school in the DRC because that's where my grandparents were missionaries, which was called Zaire at the time.
Right.
Hence, my name changed from an H to a Y.
Oh,
And I think, you know, growing up in an environment where you see people with so little but doing so much could have, it could be a factor of
yes.
just making sure that appreciating the fact that it's not the stuff that I have that makes me who I am. I have enough that can keep me going. And I just need to just dig deep continuously, irrespective of the situation that I'm in. I think one of the philosophies that I have is not to accept any failure unless if I don't learn from the experience. So
Mm-hmm.
every challenge that I encounter, I see it as an opportunity to learn. And if we look at it that way, we are obsessed about finding the positives in
Right.
every interaction, in every experience. And I can tell you in all the Everest expeditions, I always had 2 pages of what went right and half a page of what went wrong, you know. And I think
Fabulous.
if you do that, it's very easy for you to get back onto it and get on with it. And because those learnings, you are excited to try them on and see how they work. A very good example is in 2014, I climbed a mountain called La Bouche East. It took me about 10 hours, maybe a bit over, from higher camp to the summit, right? When I went back in 2015, and actually 2017, I did that same mountain. It took me less than 6 hours to do the same, uh,
Wow.
uh, attempt. I've climbed it twice. And why is that? It's because of all the learnings that I picked up,
Right.
what I saw working that I
Yes.
used. How can that be a failure? It's
Mm-hmm.
really, I mean, 2019 in itself was a success, not because of 2019 in isolation of 2014, 15, and 17. And if we change our mindset into looking at things that way, we'll realize that we're a lot more adaptive, we're a lot more resilient than we could have ever imagined.
You said something there, and I just want to touch on it because I think it's an important lesson. Just as for a matter of context, I was born in abject poverty in industrial UK, and I have been back several times and never ceased to be amazed by how many people never left. I mean, things have changed physically, that buildings have been built and other buildings have been torn down, but pretty much people are living the way they were living when I was a boy and I made the decision to leave over 40 years ago. And you're from the townships where you're surrounded by people who are living in abject poverty, who are struggling with everything. Have you been back? Do you see the people who are your age, who you were surrounded by? Have they left? Have they gone on? Or do you feel like they've just sort of accepted the circumstance?
Yeah. Some have left, some are still there. The difference between you and I is that I was from a single mother, all girls, and it was almost as if she was pitied for not having a boy, you
Mm,
know. And this is why she always would come and say, the sky's the limit. You can be anything that you want to. It sometimes is interesting to go back and find those who had boys. Their boys have inherited their houses, but they're still there. And
hmm
my mother's children we've all gone all over the world, and I think it's just appreciating that we all have different journeys, and it doesn't matter where we are now, what the world around us thinks of us. We are extraordinary. We just need to focus on what makes us unique. We're actually uniquely extraordinary, to be specific. We all
Yeah.
have a purpose, and we are complaining right now about COVID, and we were made for this time. We
Yes.
are stronger than our circumstances, and if we focus on that, we'll see how much we are not only going to survive, we're going to thrive through this pandemic.
Yeah. I've often said that your history is the place you place your roots, or it's a place you use as a runway. And I used it as a runway. Some people just plant the roots and they just go, okay, this is where I'm from. And I'm not judging that by any stroke of the imagination. But for me, I needed to make it a runway. And I look at how many people didn't do that. They chose to just plant their roots there. And it's fascinating for me that you did that. Now, the interesting thing about that as we come into the next part of the show is I want to talk about that part of you that, what has been driving you, because you told me that you believe education is the great equalizer. Tell me why you believe that.
Yeah. I think because it's the one thing that got me and my sisters out of that environment, like
Mm-hmm.
more than anything. It's the one investment that my family made in me that's allowed me to make a difference in other people's lives. That's changed not just my life, I believe my children's life as well. It's there's a quote that I absolutely love, which says, if you want to plan for 1 year, plant rice. If you're planning for 10 years, plant trees. But if you're planning for 100 years, invest in the children's education.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe in that. And it's the one way we can completely change the narrative for the next generation of Africans. And the one thing is, if you look at the world, especially with this pandemic, it's a global village, and it's really my children are no longer competing with the child next door on this next desk. They're competing with your children.
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to make sure that they have the competitive edge? They can compete at the same level. I think education is the basis of it. you know i I can go on about education. I really think that it is the key to ensuring that we are actually raising and children that are going to look at the world and not say the world must come and help us, but look at the world as a sea of opportunities and add a lot of value to put Africa on the map where it belongs.
Well, you mentioned briefly earlier that you have self-financed. You haven't had all those backers to support. Coca-Cola haven't written you a check for 100 grand or whatever it is, and you've had to self-finance. We talked about how you sacrificed your holidays or whatever it was so that you could uh, climb. But even in the climbing, you've done that to build uh, libraries and such for street kids. Tell us a little bit more about that, because that is profound.
Yeah, so when I climbed Kilimanjaro, we raised money for a home that looks after street kids. And we built them an outdoor gym, and we converted a room into a library. Although the summit happened on Kilimanjaro, when we were handing over these items, one of the kids in the home came to me and said, "Do you really come from the township?" Initially I thought this was a joke, the Black people swim kind of joke, because we kind of tell those jokes. And I realized that she was serious. And she
Mm.
said to me, people like us don't do things like this. That made me sad, especially because she said there are these kids that come as exchange students. When they go, they're the ones that kind of really help meaningfully. And as a mother of two, that really bothered me, whether I was doing enough to show my kids that help comes from within before they
Hmm.
looked elsewhere. That it doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from, they too can change the world, can step on top of the world. And that's really where I started the initiative called Summits with a Purpose. I made a conscious decision that I'm going to step on top of the highest peaks on all the 7 continents around the world, but use it to raise money for education. I mean, I've since raised over 2.6 million rands. I built
Wow.
5 Mandela libraries. I've recently built 3 digital libraries, but I've raised money to build 9 libraries in the 9 provinces around the country. But these are going to be digital libraries. And the truth of that is, you know, when I started climbing, I was saying, I'm just an ordinary African woman trying to reach extraordinary heights. And I've since decided that I'm not. I'm uniquely extraordinary. And being ordinary is a choice. If I can do this, what more can the next person do? And I'm hoping that it inspires the next person to do a little bit more, so that as a collective and a generation, we can really create that impact that we want to see for the next generation.
Yeah, I think that so often we make comparisons. We look at others and go, well, I'm not as good as that person. I'm not. But everybody's looking at the end, forgetting about the beginning. Everybody forgets that this is a township girl who who has ended up doing these things. That this is a industrial poverty boy who ended up doing things I've done. And you know, we're just 2 examples of millions, really. And looking at the end is always a way to self-defeat, but rather looking at, well, hold on, what was the journey? And you've really shown a spectacular journey. Um, what I'm going to use my term. What is the what is the damage you're fighting against? What is the force that, you know, I believe in life we are driven by the desire to serve and the desire to get rid of something. So there's something we're fighting for and something we're fighting against. Do you have a sense of those 2 things within you?
So I have been on the mountain many times and been told I don't belong there. I don't want my kids to ever be anywhere where they are made to feel that they don't belong, where they look at the world and see it as a sea of obstacles rather than opportunities that your children are seeing. I
Mm-hmm.
want to fight that. And if I can represent, yes, I attempted Everest 4 times. I hope the people coming behind me do it once, do it faster, do it quicker, but they have that comfort of saying, it's been done, it is possible, and I'm not going to be questioned about why
Mm-hmm.
I'm there. I think for me, that is more important than anything. And if I can also inspire my children or the child somewhere in the township that grew up like me to realize quicker than I did that anything is possible and the sky is not the limit. You know, they can achieve anything,
Mm-hmm.
not just what they have seen being achieved in their family, in their community. What's impossible can be achieved if they are determined and they work at it.
You know, you just said that saying that I mentioned in the beginning. Tell us that little story about the sky's not the limit.
Yeah. So that's one of the craziest things I thought about when I was on the summit. You know, there's a lot of emotions that goes through your mind. And I remember thinking about my mother, you know, saying the sky is the limit, because one thing that was very clear is the clouds were beneath me. And I was suddenly above the clouds. So
Mm-hmm.
she was definitely wrong. I know that pushed me and my sisters to do more, but I'm not going to tell my kids that the sky is the limit, because because that's what I can see doesn't mean that's what I can achieve. I can achieve more. And I think we need to inspire each other, inspire the next generation, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, you know, that we can definitely achieve more. We can walk above the clouds. It is very possible.
That's absolutely beautiful. Now we're coming towards the end of the show, and as we come towards the end of the show, there's a couple of things I always like to ask my guests. One, of course, is how people can find out more about you, and we'll come to that in a moment. But I always want to know if you could share something practical, something that our viewers, our listeners could go away and do, preferably right away, but certainly within 48 hours to integrate, to have them put into a practical way about what it is you've been sharing with us today, what would that practical guidance advice be?
I think it's believing in yourself and don't compare yourself with other people, because you are uniquely extraordinary, and what you have to give can only be given by you in a way that you can during this time. I think that for me is important, and I remind myself of that every morning using affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I do it is not to say, Sarah, you're great, is to appreciate what I did the previous day, and making sure that when I go through the day that is starting, I'm cognizant of all the positives that I'm going to achieve during that day, so that I have gratitude again the next day. I think if we do that practically, we have no time for the negativity that continuously keeps us down.
So you're always building on that, on the previous success, on the previous gratitude. That becomes the foundation for each next day. That's great advice. Thank you. There was something I did want to ask you, and just because I got to know, and that's this. You are an African woman who has climbed Everest, who has climbed many summits, but you also made it to the South Pole. Excuse me, what the hell? Why? It's too
So,
freaking cold. Why?
so yeah, you know,
Was this a moment of insanity? What happened, girl?
I know. So the dream changed from 7 summits to what is called the Explorer Grand Slam. So the 2019 attempt, I was actually partially funded by a company. They paid less than half of my summit, and I paid the other amount. When I came back, there was I didn't realize how much that climb meant to the country, to people around me. And suddenly I got offers to be sponsored. So I've been sponsored to finish my climbs. Then I thought, why not do the Explorer Grand Slam rather? So it's the
Fabulous.
7 highest peaks, which I was doing, going to the South Pole and the North Pole. Until now, there's only 67 people in the world that have done it. So it's just for good measure, why not?
You know, I can appreciate the climbing. I'm so not a fan of cold, as you probably guessed. But the South Pole has about as much pull for me as a wet sock. Not very, because I could go somewhere tropical, no problem. But and for me, it's always this fascination with the contradictory of where you come from.
Yeah,
Not even South Africa, but you come from a place even hotter than South Africa originally.
yeah,
South
yeah.
Africa is very much like Australia in weather because it's on the same latitude. But wow, that's pretty amazing. Listen, Sarah, I really want to thank you for your time. I know that we have a great deal of time difference between where I am and where you are, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, which I'm sure is not a convenient time for you. Thank you so much. I would love for you to please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you, about all of the things you're up to, and how to connect with you in all the different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. So the viewers can really reach out on Facebook. It's at Saray, SarayN Khumalo, Khumalo. On Instagram is at Saray Khumalo, SarayKhumalo. Also on Twitter, I have a website. It's www.saraykhumalo.com. And there's an email there. They can reach out. If they want to get involved in some of the stuff that I'm doing, I'll really be honored, because I do not believe that this is something that I can do on my own. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. And I'm hoping that I can go with them so that we can leave the world much better than we found it.
Well, I really appreciate that. Again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Thank you for all that you've shared. I'm assuming that if people go to the website, they can find out about the libraries and all the other things that you're doing and how they can be part of that if they want to support.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Again, thank you so much. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes. Just look for our Facebook and LinkedIn groups under the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're likely only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, you can go to dovbaron.com, dovbaron.com, because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in both individuals and in companies. We want to thank you for sharing this show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about where you have set the sky and that it is not the limit. You can get above the clouds. You can dare yourself to climb higher because you are uniquely, as our guest said, uniquely extraordinary. Of course, we will post all of the links to how you can find out more about Sarah and we'll find out more about her. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.